What's up, guys? This is Ms. Doyle coming to you for history class to discuss the Great Depression. Before we begin, I do want to go review over our objectives, and today's aims are: I can describe how the Great Depression impacted America, and your task is to complete the guided note-taking sheet. So before we begin notes, make sure that you have this pulled up. If you need to make a copy, click File, Make Copy. Essentially what you're doing is each one of these terms, you are going to describe and summarize each event. So who is involved, what's going on, why is it important, maybe how it even impacted America on a daily basis. When you are finished with the chart, make sure you scroll to the bottom. I do have some personal opinions down at the bottom that I would like you to answer to reflect on everything that you learned. So let's go ahead and get started with today's guided note-taking. So first of all, here's the compelling question. Did America really learn from its poor financial decisions in the 1930s? Okay, while we're reviewing over this topic, I want you to think about this coronavirus pandemic we are currently in. What has the government done to make sure that we do not go through a depression, to make sure we haven't lost our homes, to make sure we have enough money to be able to pay our bills? So I want you to think about those and reflect on those during this lesson, and I'll even bring them up as we are reviewing over the Great Depression. So we just learned about the Roaring Twenties. Okay, we did a Roaring Twenties web quest to kind of introduce some of the topic. But what you need to understand is after World War I, America had some serious money because they were the ones that were helping provide ammunition, supplies, ships, guns to everyone that was at war. And we had produced so many things and created, meaning invented so many things that people wanted it. So they were spending their money and putting it into the economy. And when you buy products, and for example, like as soon as the iPhone goes out, you all go out and buy the iPhone. Or as soon as the AirPods come out, people go out and buy those, or maybe even the new Jordans. Okay, that is you putting your money back into the economy. Okay, and that's what people were doing is they were buying so many things. There is an economic boom. Okay, because of the demand for products. Okay, incomes are going to rise because people want this product and there's not enough supply for everyone to buy. So it costs more money. So people keep producing these products in hopes of making a quick return. So this leads to increased goods. The stock market was at an all-time high. People were investing into companies in hopes of making money and becoming rich quick. So let's foreshadow. Although these are very positives, they ultimately lead to negatives because what must go up must come down. So we're foreshadowing, even though incomes rise, even though there's an increase in goods, at some point in time, people are going to quit buying that certain good. So when you quit buying that certain good, so for example, if you quit buying AirPods because Apple did something that was so off the wall that you started hating Apple, as soon as you quit buying Apple products, they are going to lay people off in Apple. So it's going to lead to unemployment. But it's not just one company. It's hundreds upon hundreds of companies all throughout America, which leads to this rise and spike in unemployment. Stock prices are going to drop. Ms. Doyle, what are stocks? Stocks are where you take your money and you invest shares in the company. So, for example, if I was to invest in Apple products, okay, I would have to buy shares. But everybody everywhere is buying shares in Apple. And what shares are is you giving your money to that company in hopes of them taking that dollar you give them and that taking that dollar and turning it into $5 when you share. So you are having a say in what that company does. You are helping keep that company going just in case there's problems down the road. Next is farmers. Okay, farmers helped us in the World War. Okay, they were amazing. They produced so many crops. They made so much money. But as soon as the war ended, that demand for crops and agriculture throughout the world was not needed. So the farmers began to lose money. In an effort to try to make that money, they're going to overproduce, producing too much supply when there's not enough demand. So if you have too many things, guess what? They're going to have to go on sale for you to sell them. And so that's all about simple supply and demand, which we'll talk about throughout this. So let's keep going with Roaring Twenties. The The middle class family wanted to be like the rich. The rich had the newest, best things, and we often at times try to do that ourselves. We ask our parents for stuff that they can't really afford because we want to stay with the times. Think about the new Xbox coming out. Think about the new PlayStation coming out. Okay? People are waiting in line to get it because guess what? If you have it, okay, you're going to look like you've got a lot of money, and all your friends are going to be impressed that you have the new system, while other people like me are going to wait till that price goes down in a year and actually pay $300 when you paid $500 out the gate. So it's all about your financial choices. So that's what's going on here. Think about if you did not have a washer or dryer, if you did not have a refrigerator, if you did not have a vacuum. Those are things that I personally could not live without, that people back then had no idea. So when this invention came around, they couldn't really afford to pay for that invention. So they're going to try to get that invention. Okay, let's say the vacuum, as you see in this picture, we're going to get that invention on credit. And that's what installment plans are. So I'm going to buy this product and make payments over time. That's just like the credit card we have today. It's money that we don't have, but we're paying it off in the long run. So that's what consumers started to do. They wanted to look like they were rich, so they would borrow money from banks and use their homes as collateral. Well, if you can't afford to pay for that car if you lose a job, and you can't afford to pay for those new inventions you just bought, you mean to tell me you're willing to lose your car or your home because you didn't pay off a product that you bought? Okay. Let me hide this down here. Okay. So think about the choices that they're doing. Okay. They're pulling themselves into debt every single day. But they were trying to keep up with the Joneses. And if you've heard about that, that means you're trying to be like everybody else and make sure that you look like you have your act together. But the 1920s is a period of economic prosperity, new ideas, changing values, personal freedoms, developments in art and literature, and so on and so forth. But what must come up must come down. So these are the 5 causes of the Great Depression that you need to know. 1, overproduction. 2, stock market crash. 3, bank failures. 4, the Dust Bowl. And 5, our poor economic policies. So let's talk about overproduction. Remember how I told you farmers wanted to make up that money that they lost from World War I. So they kept producing. Well, the more they produced, the more they lost money because the more of a supply, okay, means there's not enough demand to meet that supply. So the value of the corn, let's say they were making $1 a bushel, now went down to 25 cents. If you went from making $1 a bushel to 25 cents, you just lost 75 cents per bushel. So because there's too much supply and not enough demand, prices fall, which lead to factories closing, workers laid off, farmers losing their homes because they can't afford these new machines that they bought on installment to produce more. So American farmers were the first to face the Great Depression because they kept producing and their excessive plowing. It's ultimately going to lead to the Dust Bowl, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Let's talk about consumer spending. So we just talked about installment plan where you're buying things on credit, but people wanted to invest in companies because they wanted to get rich quick. So they would buy on speculation. They would buy stocks and bonds in hopes for a quick profit. So they get money instantly. And in order to do that, they'd have to buy on margin because not everybody has $1,000 to invest in stock. So Americans were paying a small percentage of stock down as a down payment and borrowing the rest from a broker who borrowed it from banks. So at any point in time, that broker could request a margin call and demand you to pay it back. But how you bought on margin, let's say if you needed to borrow $1,000, you'd have 10% down. You'd give that broker $100 and you'd say, I'm going to use my car as collateral or I'm going to use my home as collateral in case I don't pay this back. And if you don't pay it back as soon as they implement that margin call, okay, you're going to be screwed and you're going to lose everything immediately, which is exactly what happened when the stock market crashed. People were so afraid that they were going to lose all the money they invested, they began pulling their stocks out, which this is going to lead to the stock market crash because people lost a ton of money. It swamped the stock market and is literally the beginning of the Great Depression. So the top 2 causes are overproduction and the stock market crash, which ultimately becomes Black Tuesday, which is October 29th, 1929. Because stocks were failing, People are thinking, we're going to lose all our money. I'm not going to have any money. And back then, we were not insured to put our money in a bank. So people began bank runs and they began running to the banks in an effort to pull all their money out. Well, if you pull all the money out of banks, they don't have money to loan to other people in order to buy homes or buy cars. But not only did banks give money to other people, they gave your money to other people, but they also took your money and everybody else's money that was in the bank and they invested in the stock market. Think about how banks have to pay their electric bill. How do they pay their workers? It's from the interest on loans that you have and also investment in the stock. So all these people's monies were gone. And because everybody tried to pull their money out, the banks ultimately failed, meaning they had to close down. And imagine if you had $2,000 in a bank and you would never see it again. Would you trust that bank? Would you want to go back to that bank? Because now you've lost everything. Not only that, you've lost your savings, but you could possibly lose your home because you didn't pay back that margin call that broker demanded you pay. So when you're at home, I want you to watch this. Just press play in the document. It's going to give you an example of what a bank run is. I'm not going to do that while I'm going over notes. So here we go. Let's talk about the fourth cause, the Dust Bowl or drought. So farmers, because they kept over plowing and trying to use crops, and they did it over and over and over, and they didn't go to different areas of their farm. They used the same plot of land. Well, that plot of land is going to lose its nutrients, meaning it's not going to be able to produce agriculture or produce crops, and that soil is not going to be rich. Like when you touch soil and it's been cultivated, it's soft. Well, what happens is it almost comes into dust. And think about the Wizard of Oz in Kansas. So in Kansas, it's flat, it's open, and it's prone to tornadoes because of all the winds, because it doesn't have any hills or valleys like Kentucky does to block some of those winds. So it would create tornadoes. Well, think about a bunch of wind picking up all that dust that's on the ground, okay, causing people to not be able to breathe. It was causing dust storms, and it was causing long, severe droughts because of how they were cultivating it. Well, this dust bowl is going to impact farmers everywhere. It's going to destroy crops. It's going to destroy their homes, and they're going to have to pack up and migrate to California and other Pacific coast or move to cities in order to find a job because their farm is ruined. So they've got to go find factory work in order to survive. Okay, and this is the main part of where the Dust Bowl occurred. And think about it, this is pretty much a big flat area, but this dust storm is going to sweep the nation, and you are going to see it from miles away. Again, the same thing. Here is a video of the Dust Bowl. Watch this on your personal time. I'm not going to do it while I'm doing notes. So let's talk about other hardships of the Depression. And I have a couple pictures over here. In the top picture, it represents shanty towns. So remember how I told you the farmers, they had no jobs or they lost their home because they had too many installment plans and couldn't pay back their bills? Well, they had to move to cities. And when they got to cities, they had no money, nor did they have a job. So you best believe they didn't have a place to stay. So they would have to find and build their own houses. And so they were makeshift dwellings or scraps made out of scrap material that they found, known as shanty towns. Well, the president, who was known as Herbert Hoover, really didn't do anything to help this depression that was sweeping the nation. So people living in these shanty towns began to make fun of Hoover and call them Hoovervilles. Okay, this is happening because of you. People are homeless because of you. But slowly over time, out of the goodness of people's hearts and even the government, we want to help these people by feeding these people. So we start creating soup kitchens and bread lines. So you can see this in the bottom image over here, people standing out line for free coffee and donuts for anyone who is unemployed. But what ended up happening was hobos began to rise. People going from city to city, hitching rides around the country on trains, sleeping under bridges because they were drifters. They were just trying to find their next meal. They're trying to find their next place to stay because this depression is sweeping the nation. But it's not just this. I mean, imagine if you lost your home, your job. I mean, it's more than just losing physical things. It's going to impact you mentally. So the suicide rate is going to rise. People are going to turn to alcohol because they're so depressed, and that's the only thing that will take away from it. Mental hospitals are going to start collecting and taking patients. However, there are people out there with the kindness of their heart trying to help these strangers. Okay. So people started clipping and saving things in hopes of hopefully I can use this later on. For example, my boyfriend's mother, she was a child in the Depression, and she remembers her parents only having to collect the bread ties and collecting bread bags and having to have their own garden, and they lived in the city in order to have food. So they began to save anything and everything that they had to try to get over these hardships. But it wasn't just like the people's choices. It wasn't consumer spending. It wasn't farmers overproducing. It wasn't people buying on margin as much as it was our economic policies that also helped it. Now, remember, the number one cause is overproduction. Number two cause stock market crash. But you need to understand the government didn't help anything. So Herbert Hoover believed in this thing called trickle down economics, also known as supply side economics. He says if I help the big businesses by cutting taxes, okay, they will take that money they're saving and employ more people, which will allow more people to get out of unemployment and be able to pick themselves up by their own bootstraps. So rugged individualism. But what ended up happening is these businesses who were paying less taxes and paying less things towards the government now because of trickle-down economics, because of slash taxes, raise taxes for the middle and lower class, so on and so forth, they were saving it and not investing it back into the community, which continued unemployment development. And if me and you, think about that question, have we learned from that financial decision? I want you to think about that question. Absolutely. We now provide aid immediately. If you are unemployed, you can get unemployment. Okay. And in this past time, we even got a stimulus check, everyone, everywhere, because the goal is to spend money. The moment we stop spending in our economy, the moment the government makes doesn't make as much money, which causes these recessions, which causes these depressions, which is why in order to get out of a depression or recession, we as an American government and American people have to spend money in order to bring our economy up. So what must come up must go down, and what must go down will eventually come up. So while this is going on, because of this trickle-down economics, it's going to increase the gap between the rich and the poor. The rich are getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer. And it didn't help that Hoover's going to pass this Hawley-Smoot tariff that's going to accept our trade relations with other foreign countries. So it was the Hawley-Smoot tariff was enacted, and it raised tariffs on many imported goods. Now, imported goods are goods coming into the country. So if you are China and you're also experiencing a worldwide depression, and America says, hey, we're going to raise the prices on Chinese goods, I'm telling you right now, as a country, I'm going to be mad because are Americans going to want to buy Chinese products when the American products are cheaper? No. So it's going to create bad relations with other foreign countries throughout the world. So Hoover is really struggling with the depression. He believes people should pick themselves up because the people were the ones that created the problem. They went into debt on installment plans. They were the ones that invested and put their house up for collateral when they took out loans with a broker or a bank for to buy on margin. It was their choices. But it was too late before he started actually doing things and creating jobs for people. So he is going to try to help unemployment by creating a job to build the Hoover Dam. Now, we all know about the Hoover Dam. It's awesome. But it's a little too late. The American people are upset and they're done. But he does try, and here's a picture of the Hoover Dam right here. He does try to help just before the next election, before he gets elected out of office. He creates the Federal Farm Board to help farmers. He creates the National Credit Organization to help smaller banks. He creates the Federal Home Loan Bank Act and Reconstruction Finance Corporation to help protect people's homes and businesses in times of depressions or recessions. But because we're all going through this depression, people want money. And when we went to World War I, so remember, this is the time period after World War I, the people who went to war were promised a bill. They were promised money because of their services, and this bill was going to be known as the Patman Bill. So hundreds upon thousands of people rushed to Washington, D.C., and you can see this right here. Here's the Capitol. And these are all soldiers and families of soldiers who are homeless, who don't have anything left to lose. They march on Washington to try to protest the government to pass this bill. They need this money. But what ends up happening is Hoover gets upset. Congress refuses to pass it. So Hoover sends in a force of 1,000 soldiers under the commander of MacArthur Eisenhower, and he gassed more than 1,000 marchers, and he injured and killed an 11-month-old baby and 2 vets. So Americans began to be outraged because they're just doing their peaceful protest, their rights that the Constitution provides them. Because of this and his choice not to get involved whatsoever, Hoover's image is going to suffer majorly, which leads to Woodrow Wilson, our next president right here, to get elected. So because his plan failed and believed in natural process of recovery where everybody picked themselves up, Wilson's going to walk in and says, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have a new deal for the American people. We are going to use federal government authority for bold experimental remedies, meaning we're going to pump a bunch of money into creating programs to help the economy, to help the people right away. And if you're an American and you have nothing, and if you are at your all-time low, you've lost your home, you lost your house, you lost your car, you might even have got a divorce because your wife didn't choose to stay with you. So he is going to pass a series of programs, and this is exactly what it did. It put people back to work. It saved capitalism. It restored faith in the American economic system. It revived a sense of hope in the American people. And his New Deal focused on 3 things: relief, recovery, and reform, which are the 3 R's. And to ensure that this would be a success, he's going to provide Americans with immediate assistance to help them with basic necessities of life. That's relief. Recovery, policy or program that has its primary goal to promote growth in the American economy, putting federal spending and job creation. And reform, to prevent the future disaster of a Great Depression. So let's put legislation on banks and labor unions. Let's create social welfare programs. And of course, we're going to be doing this tomorrow, focusing on the New Deal. But this has just been an introduction of the Great Depression. Please make sure that you complete your guided note-taking sheet, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day.